Hello, hi. So, I am not doing any more Lovecraft theories recaps for season 1. I will say this though. I've seen a lot of chatter online and a lot of conversations, and I read something that they were in talks for season 2. I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything definitive. I haven't seen the showrunner, Misha Green, say anything definitive. Now, she did say that this story, there's more story to be told. So this video I had some theories. And so I wanted to throw them out there for larger consumption and discussion in the comments. So I wanted to see what your thoughts, if this sounded crazy, if it sounded plausible, and just also wanted to have another opportunity to discuss Lovecraft Country because it was a fantastic series to watch in real time and just kind of experiencing the cultural shift around not only a story that's centered, like firmly, solidly centered Black characters, but that was also in the horror, sci-fi, fantasy genres, because that is those two things happening in that way and becoming kind of this cultural moment is not normal. Just for horror, it's not normal for you to see horror, sci-fi, fantasy, like just those genres in general tend to definitely kind of come in as the more like pop culture or pop art, kind of like it is art, it is to be considered, but when you're wanting to get into a conversation about quote unquote serious art, you're not talking about the horror, sci-fi, fantasy space. You're talking about dramas and thrillers and things like that. So it was really cool and awesome to see that kind of cultural moment happening. Now, the theories that I have, I had a couple of theories watching the last episode and kind of seeing how things played out, and also some theories that have come up since just kind of reading other conversations that are happening in the space and what other people are talking about. So my one kind of big theory that I have said a couple of times in, a Facebook group that I'm in, and also just kind of on Facebook and in some conversations, is Dee's experience throughout the whole series of Lovecraft Country is ripe picking for a superhero origin story. Like, think about it. She was this young, happy kid living with her mom and her dad, with her favorite, big brother cousin off in the army fighting in the Korean War, which sounds, super romantic and cool. And, they would send him things, and I'm sure, Dee would write to Tick and tell him about things. He would tell her, it was this really kind of idyllic, in kind of the most basic sense of the word, childhood. And then everything goes to hell in a handbasket in her life. Her father is killed in some mysterious fashion, going off on this trip to find her uncle, who is the neighborhood drunk, who, I'm sure she had a relationship with him, but probably not as close as it could have been. So, her dad goes off to find his younger brother, who's this, I always got a feeling he was kind of like this mean uncle type. Like, he might have been cool occasionally, but he was usually kind of so stuck in his feelings and his own situations and his own moments and emotions that she may not have had the best relationship with him. But, he's still her uncle. You still love your family. And so you completely understand when your dad goes off to find him, especially when you're a favorite big brother cousin. And I'm calling him that because obviously Dee and Tick had a relationship that was more than just cousins. Like, it definitely gave me a sibling type of bond. So he comes back, she's excited to see him, and then him and her father go off to find her uncle, who, is cool, but they may not be the closest. And then her father dies. And then it's like, now she lost her father at this very young, kind of impressionable age. And her dad, seemed like this this really kind of grand character who would go out and do this great work, and was a source of inspiration for her. Even though the comics Arabia Blue was definitely more about her mother, and her mother being this fantastic person. So her mother's still here, where she loses her dad. She loses a good friend. As a child in that age range, death is typically kind of something you experience from afar. So even if, like, say your grandparents die, they're older, and so they may be sick, or something may happen. If grown-ups die, it's like they're grown-ups, they're out in the world, things can happen. When children your age die, it hits different, and it feels, I think, more real, because it's like, that could have been me. Especially the way that her friend Bobo, who we know now is Emmett Till, the way he died, and kind of how that all happened. So it's like she's dealing with that. She loses her father, she loses one of her close friends, and life is upended. And then her mother goes. So they leave, they're trying to figure out what happened to her father, and then she loses her mother. Now, they don't know if her mother died, they don't know what happened. She just knows her mother left to go solve this problem, to solve something. Her cousin and uncle and then went after her. Everybody came home but her mother. And then she's cursed by this racist detective or police chief. She's cursed by him, and then she kind of goes through this terrible journey of being stalked by Topsy and Bopsy, and the adults in her life are kind of paying attention to her, but not really, because they're caught up in their own stuff. But also she can't tell them what's going on because of the curse. And then she is she's attacked by these creatures and almost dies. Like, just that alone is some horrific stuff to happen to a kid. But then at the end of it, she ends up with this pretty dope ass bionic arm. And then she reads the book, because in the last episode we see Dee reading Lovecraft Country, which is the book that came from the future, written by her cousin, or brother, or nephew. We don't know. We don't have confirmation whether George or Montrose is truly the biological father of Tick. So it really determines either the person who wrote Lovecraft Country is either her cousin or her nephew. Nonetheless, her relative. She reads the book, she sees what's happening in the future, and she, in the moment, along with her now pet Shoggoth, she ends up killing the villain that we have been, one of the villains that we've been dealing with the whole season, with her dope ass bionic arm. Like, if that ain't an origin story for a superhero, I don't know what is. It is complete with the trauma of losing, a very close, important family member at a very young age, going through your own, brush with death, and coming out of it fortified in a way that is not human, because she has a bionic arm. It's a robotic arm. It's not a human arm. And now you have kind of this, you've touched darkness like that, where I've seen a lot of some conversations and heard some conversations where people are like, well, why did Dee have to kill Christina? And like, why did she go from this perfectly normal little girl at the beginning of the season to this murder at the end? Well, she was taken into the darkness. I mean, she was cursed, and Topsy and Bopsy, I can't remember which one, like, stuck their fingers in her and like was sucking the life force out of her. So she was in the ancestral plane, and she was able to be pulled back. We didn't see her experience. We just saw her kind of in this comatose state, and her arm was being rotted out with gangrene. But we have no idea what she was experiencing during that time. And you can't experience magic. That's one of the lessons that I saw in Lovecraft Country, was that you can't experience magic. Like, you can't be touched by it and not have it change you, because magic changes you. And so she was changed by magic. Now, did it make her a dark person? No, but I definitely think what it did was it introduced her to the darkness in a way that she can probably access it in a way that she couldn't before. So she grew up over the course of the time. And you know, she saw the future. She read the book. She saw the future. She was supposed to read the book, you know, and I wonder if she was supposed to read the book, or if when, you know, future D gave the book to Tick, thinking Tick would read it, but knowing who she was as a kid, she might read. For me, if I had a book today and I was able to travel back in time and put a book in the vicinity of, you know, 10, 11-year-old me, the odds of me reading that book are super high, because I read everything I could get my hands on, I would read. And then if it was something that specifically was a genre that I was already interested in, definitely reading it. So I can't imagine that grown-up D didn't think that young D would read the book. But she reads the book, she sees what Christina will do based on the book, and knows that she has to change things. And so she does. She does it in the most final way possible. She takes her out of the story. But all of that is prime for a superhero origin story. And I would love to see what happens with Dee as she becomes who she's meant to become. And, you know, Hippolyta had her experience, and, you know, she's a changed person. She's a new person now. She's no longer the Hippolyta she was before she went through that time warp, that time machine, and kind of went into these different planes. Because I don't know that she went through a time machine, but she ended up on different planes and being able to travel through different times. And so she's no longer the same person. So Dee and Hippolyta can have some fantastic adventures just exploring who they are now and who they have become over the course of this journey. Another thing that I think would be cool to see, and this is something I've seen other people say, I saw it, I heard it, the thing that I can think of most currently, I was listening to the podcast, Black Girl Watches, and I'll link to it down below, where they were talking about how, you know, at the end of it, they essentially, Atticus had to risk his life. He had to sacrifice himself in order to take the magic away from, you know, the Braithwaite and their bloodline and bring it into his bloodline, but also give it to Black people. And so it's like they were talking about on the podcast how they could open up, you know, schools of magic to teach the Black people how to use the magic that they are now bestowed with. That could be a fantastic story, kind of along the lines of, I mean, I guess we could kind of do Harry Potter, but I'm thinking of more so the show that comes on the CW, Legacies. That's a spinoff of the originals, which was like about the original vampires. They had a series called Legacy, which was about one of the daughters of the original. She was a mixed hybrid child. Her father was an original vampire and her mother was a werewolf. And so she was like, and her mother was like a badass, powerful werewolf. And so she was a mixture of them. And she went to the school that was for magical children to kind of teach them how to live in the world and also how to use their abilities safely and interact, you know, and exist within regular people who are not magical creatures and spirits and things of that nature. And so I can see it kind of being along those lines, but it's HBO, so we can also throw a little magicians-esque situation in there where they have like these magic schools where these kids go to learn how to use magic, but they're Black kids, so they're essentially like HBCUs. That would be dope. That would be fantastic. So I've seen it come up a couple of places, but I've heard it first when I was listening to Black Girl Watches, and of course I'll link to that down below. I'll also link to the main podcast, so if you're dropping in on these theories, you should definitely check out the podcast. If you know, I'm hoping that if you're listening to this, you have watched this series. If not, stop where you are and make sure you watch the series, but check out the podcast. If you didn't listen to the podcast about the series, it was actually really interesting, and they talked about some details that you may have missed, or they talked about it in a way that you might not have considered. So it was very interesting, so I'll link to that as well. But that was another thing. So I really just wanted to kind of hop on and talk about a couple of theories that I had about where the show is going to go. Origin story for Dee being a superhero, I think that would be fantastic. Even if it doesn't turn into a series, because superhero series are hard. It's tough to make those look good, but like a graphic novel, a comic book, an animated series, because if it was like animated but it kept the spirit of Lovecraft, where like you had the horror, you had the adult themes, like it wasn't like, it didn't become a kiddie animated series where it stayed like an adult animated series, I watched the hell out of that. Like I think that would be amazing and dope and cool if they did that. Also, the whole idea that now that all Black people, you know, have magic, now there needs to be someone to show them how to use the magic. And, you know, Journey, Letty Lewis is the perfect person to spearhead that. She's already kind of been put out as a person who cares about the just kind of the Black community as a whole, and this one who's making these moves in her life because she wants to make things better for the Black community. This would be fantastic for her to kind of get a bunch of houses or a bunch of buildings and places all over the country in different cities, where then you would teach the Black kids magic. And of course, it's still Jim Crow at the time, so it's like we can watch how that will, how that could possibly affect history. Like that could be this whole historical drama where we would see them, you know, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and we can even take it into the future and see like what would a world look like if all of the Black people had magic and then were taught to access that magic and how to utilize it. That would be fantastic. There's just so many things that this can go. Now, the story that they've told through this series, that story is finished. It's complete. This is the book. If you haven't read the book, I haven't. I plan on reading it or getting it on Audible. You know, that story is finished. But there's so many stories that can be pulled out of the different stories that were told in the series, that I think it would be wonderful. I mean, we can flesh out some other characters. Like I would be very interested, and while this might not be a full, you know, show or something, but like what happened with I think her name was Tamara. I'm drawing a blank on her name. I will find it and then I will drop it somewhere in the video. But you know, who Ruby was kind of mistreating at the who worked at the department store. Ruby was mistreating, but then ended up, you know, wrecking shop on the boss who was sexually abusing her. Like what happened with her, especially once she realizes, once she is imbued with the magic, and now she learns her power. Like how could that go? That could be a whole other story that we could spin off from. Like the possibilities, I won't say are endless, but there's a lot of possibilities. So those are my theories. Just wanted to say a couple of things. What did you think? Now that you watched the series, what did you think? What are some extra stories that you could see would be interested in seeing played out in future iterations of Lovecraft Country? Because it wouldn't be, you know, we could build on what was happening as if we kind of had like a season 2 where we follow these characters further. But I think that story ended the way that it ended. I would love to see what would happen with Gia. Like her whole experiences being a kumiho and kind of what that means, and her figuring out and realizing, you know, that tapping into the darkness isn't necessarily a bad thing, because she tapped into the darkness and then she came out of it alive and actually helped save the day and helped make things, you know, turn out as positive as they could at the end, in spite of the loss of the people that we lost in the end of the series. But like that's like all of that. So what did you think? What are some stories that you think could happen if we were to use Lovecraft Country as a jumping off point and go from there? And now these don't necessarily have to be Lovecraft Country. These can be whole new stories just with those characters as an inspiration. So tell me, what do you think? What are your thoughts? Let's talk about it in the comments. I know I'm sad that you're sad. A rewatch of Lovecraft Country wouldn't be a bad idea. Dive back in, because there's so many Easter eggs and so many small details that now that you've made it through the season and had conversations, you can watch it with new eyes, and you might see all new things that you hadn't even noticed before to make it an interesting viewing experience again. But that is it. Those are my thoughts. This was fun and cool. Let's talk in the comments. What do you think? So I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. But again, if you haven't yet, subscribe. I am talking about so many other things on this channel that I think you might like some of them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about some of my other reviews and other topics that I jump on. So let's chat. Let's keep this party going. this was fun. So I look forward to seeing you pop into other videos. I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are down below. And I look forward to the next time that we can talk again. Bye.